Okay, perfect. Good morning, everybody. It's time for us to get started. As I told you when we finished, well, for those of you that were on Thursday and Friday, as we were wrapping up the RLA, the residential listing agreement, and a couple of the disclosures that download with those. We talked about a lot of other disclosures that would be involved, and that's kind of what we're going to go over today. We're just going to talk about what you and your seller primarily. A lot of times we think of it as we have to get this disclosed, and we do, in that our seller doesn't know what they have to disclose. So it's up to us to walk them through this process. But obviously, a buyer has the right to know what they are buying. We had a big issue the other day that I was talking with an agent with, and they said that the seller was selling the property as is. And I understand that it says that in the residential purchase agreement. It says as is, and it's as it was represented on the day that the offer was signed and all of that. But a couple of things that we have to remember is as is, a buyer still has the right to know what that is. That doesn't automatically mean that their disclosures are no good anymore, that they don't have the right to investigations or anything. In fact, the contrary. The disclosures are even more important. If you're a seller that's going to sell a property as is in its current condition, then it is up to you to be more thorough in your disclosures as far as what the property actually entails. And it's okay. We'll get to this when we talk about the TDS and the SPQ in a minute. It's okay to sell a property with air conditioners that are broken and stoves that don't work and all kinds of things. It's okay to sell it that way as long as the people are paying cash or have hard money loans or something that don't require a lot of repair work, and that you have told them that those things don't work and that they still have the right to find out. So it's up to us to make sure that a buyer knows what it is they're buying. The seller has the duty to let them know. Who knows better what's going on in the property than the seller? Now, I know we can go off on another tangent here and talk about how, well, I'm an investor and it's a rental property for me and I'm not really living in it, so I really don't know. A landlord is not exempt from disclosing things. In fact, I'm a landlord. I have several rental properties. And boy, I know more about the properties, what's wrong with the properties than anybody does, because the very day something doesn't work, they're on the phone to me saying, hey, plumbing doesn't work, air conditioning doesn't work, whatever. So I know things don't work right off the bat, and I also know when I've repaired them. So anyway, the seller has a duty to let them know anything that's going on. And electronic signatures do not change that. Now, the thing we've gotten into with electronic signatures, and I'm not picking on any one person, you can fit yourself into this bucket if you want to, but we send out a transfer disclosure statement, a seller property questionnaire, we send out fire hardening, and we just kind of send them out for e-signatures with AuthentiSign or DigiSign or DocuSign or Please Sign or whatever it is that we send it out with. And we check the little box where they're supposed to either initial or sign. But do we actually take the time to go over those with them? And the chances are probably 50-50 that we do not. And it's unfortunate. We send it to them and they say, okay, and I know that for a couple of reasons. One is that sometimes when people send something out, they'll send it out right now and it'll be back to them in 2 minutes, right? It came in on the guy's phone or the gal's phone and she went chicka, 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 and she signed everything she was supposed to, and it comes back to you and it's 2 minutes later. Well, how could they possibly have had a chance to read through the disclosures and get everything explained to them and everything in 2 minutes? Now, what I recommend is if you're going to e-sign, text them and let them know that you sent some paperwork over for them to do electronic signing. And when would you have time to go over those on the phone? And then get them on the phone with you later on that day or early that evening, or depending on the time, obviously, and get them on the phone and then walk through each disclosure that you sent to them. so that they actually understand what's going on and they actually understand what it is that they're disclosing. So remember the electronic signatures, you may have those on file, but I can tell you that if you end up in an arbitration or a court even later on, if somebody says, well, they sent it over to me, and the verification on DocuSign, for instance, is that I sent it out at 10:10 and it was back to me at 10:20, all signed and initialed. No court, no arbitrator, no anybody is going to think that they had time to understand what that whole thing was. So you better have an explanation that you went over it all first.
Barry,
And so, yes,
sorry to interrupt.
okay.
I'm so glad you brought this up because I just had some clients sign a RPA for an offer that we put in on a home, and we did go through all of the RPA and but it was over the phone and it was via a printout, and then they just received it and they signed it. So I'm just wondering how you would maybe document that if you didn't have them have it open on their end to show that timestamp.
Well, that's a good question, and actually, you probably don't unless they have it open on both of them. I think that depending on the, I think depending like an RPA, for instance, that is something that you do. Obviously, it's a contract, and so it is extremely important to have that documented somehow that you guys went through that, and so that is. I would say that you would have to do that with possibly a FaceTime or possibly emails or something else that had some kind of timestamp documentation. There is no additional form, but that's a good idea. That they have some kind of a form that says that they've read and understand, or that they've taken the time with Portia to go over everything, and I'll have to give that some thought.
So Terry, do we, as an agent, do we have a duty to ensure that they have sufficient time to review the documents, or that they've reviewed the documents in what we consider to be a sufficient amount of time? Or is that onus on the buyer themselves? Because a lot of buyers say, I don't need for you to go over it with me, I'll just sign it.
Yeah, and that's kind of it. It's on the buyers themselves a little bit, because the thing of it is even if I sent something out at 10:12 right now, and they didn't go over it until 7 o'clock tonight when they got home from work. Well, that's 8 hours that they had to go over it.
Right.
Now, did they?
Right.
I don't know. Maybe they just sat down at 7 o'clock tonight when they got home and said, oh, well, we may as well get this done.
Right.
And click, 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 and still didn't review it and things. And so I think that a verbal conversation is an important thing to go. I think that it's important to let them know that you need to walk them through this contract.
At least we can cover ourselves with that. It's just reporting the fact that we gave them, or we offered them the opportunity for a personal walkthrough.
Yeah. And if you do that in the form of an email, then you have
some proof.
Yeah. That you at least offered that up and said, let's get together and things. But I think Portia has a good thought there. I think that there should be some way of documenting that.
Okay.
We'll figure out something. We want to keep you out of realtor prison.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so let's talk about the disclosures just a little bit. The first one I'm going to go over, and it's not one that you use all the time, but we're going to go over it because it eliminates the thing. It's called the ESD, the Exempt Seller Disclosure. Now, as it says here, some sellers of real property may be legally exempt from the TDS. For example, probate, bankruptcy, court sales, sales by government entities, they're all exempt from the TDS. Now, why are they exempt? Well, they're exempt because they indeed have never lived in the house. If you're selling a probate, it could be handled by a son or a daughter, or it may be handled by somebody that the court just assigned to handle the execution of the probate. Bankruptcy, anytime you're involved in bankruptcy and things, the bankruptcy, obviously the bankruptcy court is not liable for anything. They've never lived in the house. They don't know what works and what doesn't, and they're not required to have an inspection. And government entities, if it's a any kind of a foreclosure, if it's any kind of a even a trust, if it's a successor trustee that's handled it, if it, some of them are exempt. They may not be if it's a trustee of a trust and one of them is still alive, then obviously, even though it's being sold as a trust, then somebody's still alive and somebody's still aware of what's going on with the house. But if the trustee left a successor trustee in charge and both parties passed away that were in the trust, maybe that successor trustee has never lived in the house and doesn't know all of those things. So the possibility of an exemption exists in all of those cases. So what you have to do though is you have to get this signed saying that they know that they're exempt and or they think they're exempt and they haven't ever lived in the property and they don't know anything about it. And then obviously we send the ESD out with any of the disclosures that we do have, because we do still have some disclosure responsibility. And we'll cover those in just a minute. But this lets the buyer know that some of these things I don't have to tell you because I don't know them. And so it even makes it more imperative that the buyer take the time to do his inspections or have his professional inspectors in there or have anybody that he feels is necessary to get in there, because he doesn't know. There's a furnace that exists in there. Do I know if it works? There's a water heater that's there. I see it. But if the house hasn't been lived in a while, then does the water heater work? Does any of that stuff work? So it makes it more incumbent upon the buyer and the buyer's agent to make sure that all those inspections get done, because guess what? He's exempt. He doesn't have to tell us. He doesn't know. And so he can't tell us. We don't want him making things up. He's not legally required to do a pre-sale inspection or anything. He could if he wanted, but he's not liable and he's not legally required to do that kind of thing. But we need to let people know that they are exempt for whatever reason it is. If it's we've run into a couple lately that are starting to, hopefully we won't get tons of them because people still have plenty of equity in their property, but we're running into a couple of things that where they're going to foreclosure. Well, obviously once the bank owns it and then turns it over to a realtor to sell it for them, the bank doesn't know what's going on in the property. So they are exempt. And so there are people that just don't know. Think it through, pay attention, and if they're exempt, then they're exempt. All right. Disclosure information advisory. Okay, this just lets the sellers know that all sellers in California are required to provide various disclosures. Now, notice it doesn't say may provide, it says are required to provide. Now, among those, the disclosure requirements is they have the duty to disclose all material conditions or defects or issues that might impact the value or desirability of the company. And then failing to provide disclosures may lead to a claim or a lawsuit. So those are the important things. Now, as a seller, you may be required, and the reason it says may be is because, again, you may have an ESD, you may not be required, but as a seller of a property, you may be required to fill out a real estate transfer disclosure statement, TDS, a seller property questionnaire. And notice it identifies on here the ESD a second time, the exempt seller disclosure. And those need to be signed along with other disclosure forms that get downloaded with your residential listing agreement. So disclosure requirements are big. I can tell you that the number one thing in California real estate for a long time, the number one thing that lawsuits are generated from is like 3 words, okay? And it's nobody told me. And or I didn't know, you know, those kind of things create more issues. And sometimes it's the seller that didn't know that he had to disclose it. Well, that's falls back on us, which is why a realtor gets drug in, because they don't know. When I say they, the seller, and they, the buyer, do not know what's legally required. They don't know about any of these forms. They don't have access to zip forms, so it's not. It's not their responsibility to do this. It's our responsibility as a realtor to make sure that they know that they are not exempt from disclosing this. So they need a transfer disclosure or whatever it happens to be. So it's up to us as a realtor to make sure they know, because obviously without us, they wouldn't know what they had to do. It doesn't come up in any of your high school or college classes. All right, so this goes through and it talks about all of the ramifications and all of the things. It just kind of details it, and we're not going to detail it here today, but I would encourage you to detail it with your sellers. But so section A, for instance, asks you to check a series of boxes that indicate what appliances, fixtures, and other items exist on the property, and asks whether or not they're not working. And if they're not working, we have to identify that they're not working. Can you sell the property that way? Yes, absolutely. But you just have to tell them the buyer, and them, the buyer's agent, that they're not working. And then you can sell it with them not working if the buyer wants to move forward. The buyer also has an opportunity, as long as it's within the confines of the contingency section of the contract, to bail out if they want to. Carla, you have a question?
Yeah, how long has this particular form been around? For quite a while?
Yeah, it's been around a few years. I think it came out in like 2020 or so. And then it was revised again in 2023.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it was revised in June of 23. But so it's been around for probably, I think it was probably 2020 or 2019, somewhere in there, when it originally came out.
Hey, Terry, I got a quick question for you.
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
The SPQ and the TDS, one of those, my understanding is one of those is mandatory to be filled out, and then the other is optional, like one's legally required and then the other one's optional. Is that correct? Or are they both legally required?
Okay, so individually, the only one that is required by California law and legislation
Yeah.
is the transfer disclosure statement.
Okay. Okay.
However, that being said, and we'll get to that in just a second, I think, but in the transfer disclosure statement, it does say that an SPQ will be provided. So it's kind of like the law says
Okay.
just this one does, but then it also identifies the other one.
Okay.
All right, so speaking of that, let's talk about that. Real estate transfer disclosure statement. Civil Code 1102, whatever, all of those things, that all makes a difference to somebody in the legal system and things. To us, we just have to know that what Rochelle said is accurate, and that is the transfer disclosure statement, unless the ESD is signed and the people are not required to provide it, then every sale that a seller is involved in has to provide the TDS. And the TDS, notice that it says right here at the top, this property is a duplex or a triplex or a fourplex. Where'd my mouse go? Oh, there it is. So this is an important thing that people overlook sometimes. And that is that a TDS is required for all units. So if you're selling a duplex, if you're selling a triplex, if you're selling a fourplex, and notice it stops at fourplex. That's because it only applies to residential 1 through 4. So once it's beyond a fourplex, when it goes to 5, 6, or apartments or anything else, then this form is not required. However, if it's any of those up to 4 units, a TDS is required for each unit. And that seems pretty obvious as to why. And that is that one unit could have a working this and another unit could have a non-working this. And then somebody has a great that, and the other one has a lousy that. And so every unit can be different. So a TDS must be supplied for each one, unless you check this little box that identifies that only one unit can be done. And when that would happen is almost like never. The only time that would happen is if somebody for some reason had to go through an entire eviction process to get somebody out of the house because the tenant was being totally uncooperative and things. So I can do a TDS for units 1, 2, and 3, or only unit 2, but I can't do it for 4 yet. But that kind of identifies the fact that it will be coming. I just can't do it now type thing. So this TDS is only 4, and then you put whichever units are involved. But eventually, upon sale, all units will have to have a TDS. Here's the
quick
property.
question.
Yes, Shakira.
Hi, good morning, Terry. A quick question.
Sure.
Is this TDS required only in sales? What about leasing? When you lease a property?
No, there's different forms involved with leasing. A transfer disclosure statement is for sale of a residential 1 to 4.
Thank you.
All right, so we fill it out, we put in the address, as you might expect, we put in the date that the disclosure was done. And then notice on here, it says it is not a warranty of any kind by the sellers or agents representing any principals in this transaction. It's not a substitute for any inspections or warranties they principals may wish to obtain. So that's kind of a little disclaimer basically that says that, you know what, on July 13th, 25, the seller filled out a transfer disclosure statement and gave us this information. And this information that they gave us was as of 7/13/25. There may be things that happen along the way. They may repair things along the way. There may be things break along the way. So we can do amendments to this, and we're going to go over that in just a few minutes. But as of this date, this is what the seller thought was working or not working. Now, on this form, this is not a U form. All right, when you pull it up on zip forms, and you probably already have in many cases, but when you pull it up on zip forms, it does not give you the opportunity as an agent to check these boxes ahead of time. They all come out with a little red or pinkish type block on here so that you couldn't check it on there, even if you knew that there was a range there and you just thought, well, I'll just help them out a little bit. All right, that's not the idea. The idea is that it is a report to be filled out by the owner, and that's also a safety net for you. And the safety net for you is that, hey, it's not me telling anybody that these things work or don't work. It's the seller telling you what works and what doesn't work, what's been fixed and what hasn't been fixed, and the age of things. And so it's the seller telling us, and we don't get involved in that part of it, which is wonderful because that keeps us a little bit free from yeah, exactly. Keeps us free from realtor prison.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot of people in realtor prison, by the way, so don't panic over that. But anyway, so it lets people know what's going on. Now, this could include a couple things. I'm going to bounce back here for just a second. But says here, substituted disclosures. There are other disclosures. We're going to go over those in a minute, but there are other disclosures required by law, including the natural hazard disclosure report and earthquakes and fires and special assessments and all of these different things that may be part of this transaction. The other thing that needs to be part of this transaction is inspection reports pursuant to the contract. So as a seller, I had a roof inspection done because when it rained last winter, you remember that 1 hour that we got rain here in Southern California? It didn't seem like it was very much longer than that. But anyway, we got a little bit of rain and somebody's roof leaked. And so they had a roof inspector come out, a roofing company. They did an inspection. They replaced a few shingles or they did whatever. Now that becomes a disclosure item. And it's a good disclosure item if you think of it, because, hey, there was a leak and we had it fixed. And so from a seller standpoint, they shouldn't be trying to hide the fact that there was a leak and they had it fixed. They should be stepping up to the plate and saying, here was the inspection that was done, and here was the work that was finished. And so there may be some other inspection reports and things on there that will be involved. And if there are, you check this little box and you write it here: roof inspection, well inspection, septic inspection, whatever it happens to be, and you write those things in. So let's drop down here for just a second. The following are representations made by the sellers. And you see, it says that again, and not the representation of the agents. If any, this information is a disclosure not intended to be part of any contract between a buyer and a seller. So this isn't a contract. This is a disclosure. There's a difference. The contract that everybody has to sign and that goes into escrow, the open escrow, is the residential purchase agreement and any addendums that may apply. And those have to go in. Escrow doesn't care about things that have to be fixed. That's going to be between you and everybody else. The only time escrow becomes involved in that is if the lender becomes involved in that. And then the lender wants repair work done and things. Or you're trying to get things paid out of escrow. For instance, you have a termite inspection done and there's some termite work that needs to be finished. Then we want escrow to know about it, so those reports will go in. But it's not required to get to that point. Seller is occupying or not occupying the property. Now, does that matter as far as the TDS goes? Well, what we talked about just a couple of minutes ago applies here, and that is that if they are not occupying the property, that does not necessarily free them of the disclosure responsibility. But it's good for a buyer to know, isn't it? If they know that you've been living there and this doesn't work or this does work or something, it adds a little more credence to it than if I've had tenants in there for a while. But that's okay. If I've had tenants in there for a while, then as a buyer, I want to do a more thorough investigation, or I want to make sure somebody knows that ahead of time. So it's strengthening your disclosure stance. So the first part is easy, but it's up for the seller to fill out. And that is that it says the subject property has the items checked below. Now, it doesn't say anything about it at this point in time. It has a range, it has an oven, it has a wall air conditioner, it has sprinklers, it has whatever, and you just check each of these individual. They just check each of these individual boxes. Now, when you do e-signature and you send it out for AuthentiSign, for instance, or DigiSign or whatever, then the seller will have these boxes open to them. And so they will be able to go through and check. So from an agent standpoint, that requires a little additional information when you're talking it over with the seller. Be sure and check those boxes that apply, that type of thing. So if you have a range, check a range. If you have a microwave, check a microwave. And go through all these things. Then at the end of it, it says down here, are there any, and here it throws into the best of the knowledge of the seller, any of the above that are not in operating condition. If they check yes, then whatever item it is that's not in operating condition, you write in this box right here, this line right here. And you can write in several. You just put hot tub not working. Whatever it happens to be. Smoke detectors, obviously those are going to be required eventually anyhow, but maybe there are some that are not in operating condition. So you let people know that, yes, there are these items. Item 1, item 2, item 3, and we talk about the items that are in there. We let people know. Now we've disclosed to the buyer what we're supposed to disclose.
I just wanted to share a story that it's how important it is, because a lot of sellers like to play semantics and won't want you to fully disclose certain things. I had an instance where the seller replaced the roof because there was a roof leak. Now the seller wrote on the TDS that the roof was in place, has warranty, but never mentioned anything about the roof leak. So I went ahead on the agent section, I put seller disclosed that the roof was repaired because of a roof leak. Seller was upset with me for doing that, but I said you have to do this for your own protection. Turns out when the buyer, because now we put the onus on the buyer to figure out what that roof leak was about. So the buyer had an inspector, and it turned out there was a lot of black mold in the area where the roof leaked. So that's what, and then the seller ended up looking like the hero in the eyes of the seller, because
Yeah, that's a good story. And that happens on a regular basis. The other thing that happens with things is you get a home inspector that'll go up in there. And they're gonna find out that the roof leaked anyway,
Right,
because they're gonna see water stains on the underside, the plywood there.
right.
Or they're gonna see matted insulation. Because when the water drips down on the insulation, it matted,
Right.
you know, it makes it all matted and things like that. So all those things are gonna be very obvious. It's it's always a good idea for the seller to mention it up front and things.
When in doubt, disclose.
That's exactly right. Should always. Okay, so we write down what works or what doesn't work. And if everything works, that's wonderful. They've taken good care of their houses, well maintained, all those things. But anyway, let people know what's going on. Are you a seller aware of any defects or malfunctions in the following? And then it says walls, ceilings, insulation, roofs, windows. A lot of these things, sometimes when you get to insulation and things, they may not know some of these things. Well, that's okay. What does it say here? It says, are you, the seller, aware? Well, no, I haven't been in the attic in years. I don't know what's going on up there. Okay, so we have no's or we have yeses, whatever it happens to be. A lot of people don't know what's going on with the foundation. Sometimes they do know what's going on with the foundations and they figure out ways to put carpet over it and things to cover foundation cracks and stuff. That's where people get in trouble down the road. It's hard to. I had a house listed for sale about a year ago, I guess. And it was really a nice little house. It was just a small one, little 2-bedroom, 2-bath in a senior community. And the owner had tenants in there before. And then he decided that he wanted to sell it. So he called me and said, Terry, can you sell this house for me? And I said, oh, maybe I can sell it. We need a price. But yeah, so I went out there and everything looked pretty good. There were a couple things that I didn't pay too much attention to because he painted, he put new carpet in, he had new windows and new this and new that. Place was in pretty good shape. And the very first showing from another agent, I got a phone call, and the phone call said, the agent said, Terry, is there anything going on with the foundation that we should know about? And I said, well, not that the seller mentioned to me. What brings that to light? And he said, well, we went out there and there was a master bath off the master bedroom, and that was against an exterior wall. And if you happen to be just standing in the right place, it definitely was there had definitely been some settling or something there. And anyway, we had an engineer come out and take a look at it. Yes, there was some foundation settling on that side. So the landlord tried to find out how much it was going to cost to get that taken care of for the owner. And he ended up re-renting it instead because he didn't want to spend the thousands of dollars that it was going to take to build up the foundation. And he said, I didn't know that there was anything wrong with foundation. I said, well, you probably haven't stood in the entryway of the master bath because that's where you can feel it. And then when the carpet was pulled back, certainly you could see what was going on. But anyway, so it wasn't necessarily that he knew or he didn't know. You can't accuse people, you can't say, you liar. It's kind of one of those things where you just say, oh yeah, well, I didn't notice it either, frankly, I was out there. And I don't walk step by step by step through every inch of a wall to see if there's something going on. And so maybe the seller was unaware. And so maybe it was an after the fact, but now he decided it was going to cost him too much. He couldn't make any money out of the sale of the house, so he wanted to put it back on the market. So for a listing, a lease. And so he did that. Are you aware of any of the following? So, this is a funny one because we have a lot of areas, especially in Southern California, and I'm not sure up like in Palos Robles or something like that up there, but we have lots of retired people in Southern California that they all have some skills from the past. They can build this, they can improve that, they can do whatever. And so we run into a lot of issues with this one here, but let's just talk about this for a second. Do you know of any substances or materials that might be an environmental hazard, like asbestos or formaldehyde? Do you know of any of these things? Most people do not know about those things unless they have had construction work done, and then somebody says, oh, your tile in the kitchen has asbestos. It was asbestos back in the day, 1960s, and it's asbestos tile. And so maybe you know that. But in most cases, people have not had those inspections done. And so the likely answer for most of them, again, where it says, are you the seller aware, is they're going to put a no, I'm not aware. There are some on here that are pretty obvious that you're going to be aware of. And that is like features shared in common. And it says on here as an identifier, walls, fences, driveways. So it tells you what kind of thing. Most people can tell, or you can tell, whether there's a fence there. Is that fence yours, or is that fence theirs, or is it shared, or is it the property divider or something? Who knows? But anyway, the other thing here has to do with things like room additions and modifications. That I swear I don't know of very many senior development houses that somebody hasn't enclosed a patio and made a screen room out of it, or maybe maybe built a full room out of it, or maybe somebody turned half of their garage into an office space or something else. People do all kinds of things like that. I've done that before. Not in my home recently, but I needed some office space in a home that was too small, or I had too many kids at the time, or whatever it was. But it created a situation where I decided to just throw up for lack of a better word, a fake frame in the garage. It was deep enough that I was able to frame off about 10 feet by the width of the garage, which was 24 feet, so about 200 feet. And I turned it into an office and things. I used it as an office for a couple of years. Now, for my heat in the winter, I had to have a space heater if I was going to be out there, and for my cool in the summer, I had to put a evaporative cooler in the corner or something. So people do those kind of things. So there's going to be room additions. There's going to be things done. You can tell when you walk into a back patio if their main light for the back patio used to be the porch light, and now it's the light for their pool room or whatever. Obviously, they didn't do all the things they were supposed to. They just built it themselves, which is still okay. You can still let people know. There still will be some value on it. It's not going to give you the value that the rest of the house did. If the rest of the house is $350 a square foot, a screen room on the back is not going to add to the square footage. It's just going to be, depending on the size and things, it might be $10,000 or $20,000 worth of value in living space, but it's unpermitted living space. So anyway, if we know of any of those things, or if they know of any of those things, they need to let us know. Oh, that's a nice room that you have back there. Did you get permits on it? Well, no, we just kind of did it ourselves. Or in some cases, they did get permits. Or sometimes when they bought the house, it was already there. And so we don't know, but we need to bring up those situations. So it's up to us to kind of trigger those comments sometimes. When we walk into a room that's off the back of a house or in a garage or any kind of a mix and match or something, there's some basic things you look for. Does it have a standard sized door? Does it have an 8-foot ceiling? Does it have vented heat or air conditioning into it? Are there outlets in all 4 walls? Because if it were permitted, if it were by permits, then that code would require that there's an outlet all over the place. If they've got one outlet out there and 2 power bars that hold 6 cords each, then it becomes a fire issue and things. And so just look for those kind of things. It's not up to you to disclose them. It's just up to you to ask. I noticed that there's no outlets out there. Oh yeah, we didn't put any outlets in. Okay,
I have a question.
yeah, go ahead.
For that number three, any encroachments, I was involved in a transaction where the seller was a best friend of mine who flipped properties.
Uh-huh.
This is down in San Diego. He bought this little two-bedroom cottage. And the driveway in between his house and the neighboring house was just wide enough for a car to fit. So, and it was basically his property,
Mhm.
but it was just wide enough to fit the car, for him to drive a car to the backyard. It was one of the properties that property is historic, has some historical value because it was one of the very first homes to own a car. So
Wow.
you drive the house to the back of the yard, there was a turntable that allowed the owner to spin the car around to drive it back out when he needed to. But it was all covered up with bricks. But so anyhow, the question about encroachment and all that, I put, I don't know. And he put, he didn't know. And then the title report came and said that it was built in a zero lot line and just all kinds of disclosures. Well, the buyer ended up suing, saying that we didn't disclose that information, which I'm not an expert, so I didn't know. So I was relying on the third party report, which is the title report.
Mhm.
We ended up settling, the seller ended up settling, didn't want to draw it out, and ended up paying him whatever he was asking for just to get the transaction done with. So what do you do in situations like that where there's third party reports? Because I'm not the expert, but you have a third party report, which is the title report that basically is the disclosure.
Mhm.
Can that be substituted for the seller's disclosure?
Yes, it can. The thing of it is that there are things that I wouldn't know about a driveway that had been poured over a turntable because that's the way they used to turn the car around and stuff.
Right.
I mean, how would you know that stuff?
Right.
But if it came out on the preliminary title report, and that's why the preliminary title report comes out early. When you open escrow, now that may not be a disclosure that you have when you're doing your disclosures initially, or it can be. You can call a title company if there's any concerns or any thoughts. You can get a pre-listing, any title company that we deal with, you can get a pre-listing prelim. And they'll give it to you.
Right.
And of course, they expect your business.
Right.
Down the road, because it does take them takes them a couple of days and things. But when the prelim comes out, there's still an investigation period. You still have the opportunity to disclose things. And if it came out on the prelim, that is indeed a disclosure. And I would point that out to the other agent.
Yeah. Okay.
And let them know that there seems to be,
Right.
somebody can still do some.
Right.
Then a buyer could do survey work or whatever they wanted to try to find out.
They said that because I was an agent with a close association to the seller, that I had a higher duty of responsibility to disclose because I was an agent. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not listed as a party to the transaction. I'm just the agent. And there is disclosure in form of the title report. So, but it was up to the seller. Eventually, he decided to just pay it off and get it over with.
Yeah, and that probably would have happened anyway, just so you know, because what you said there a minute ago, we have a higher responsibility. As a realtor, we have a higher responsibility to make sure that the disclosures are done.
Right.
But we don't have a higher responsibility to disclose because we're one of those people that don't live in the property.
Right.
Good point. Glad you had to do that. See, you learned something.
Yeah.
It didn't even cost you any money. Okay, so if they know of anything, it's obviously yes, 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 or no, 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 whatever it happens to be. But if they know of it and they check a yes, then it requires you to drop down here. And again, you put number 9. There was major damage to the property due to a fire, but it's all been fixed. Insurance took care of it, blah, blah, blah. And all of those things were taken care of. But yes, there was damage. Is there a homeowners association? Is there CC&Rs? And those are all things that we're going to, if there are CC&Rs, then those are things we're going to be trying to get put together early in a transaction so that we can resolve things early.
Right.
That I think that's the big benefit of disclosures, period, is that, I don't want deals to fall apart. You don't want deals to fall apart. We all want to try to figure out how to keep deals together. But if they're going to fall apart, I want them to fall apart now. I don't want them to fall apart 3 weeks from now, or when we're hitting the end of our inspection periods, and then people are trying to get extensions because they couldn't get, no, I want everything done right up front. So if we can disclose things up front, if we can go through things up front, If we can get copies of CC&Rs, if we can get homeowners association rules and regulations, if we at least know that there's common areas like pools and tennis courts and everything, get all of those things identified right up front. And sometimes people will just overlook them. The seller might just overlook them because they haven't ever really lived in the property maybe, or they don't use those things, but they still exist. So it's up to us to let people know. And are there any lawsuits against the property? You just had one that you were talking about, yeah. So threatening or affecting the property, claims or damages. What kinds of things are those? I mean, those can be anything from somebody that's getting sued for mechanics liens to bankruptcies or anything else. All of those things can cause issues.
Are depths on the property no longer disclosable?
It is, it's not on this. All right. And here, and this, we did away with the, it's still there for the ESD, but we did away with the water heater and smoke detector compliance statement form. There used to be a statement, separate statement form, and on a couple of times ago, they added it to the transfer disclosure statement. It said seller certifies that as of the close of escrow, they will be in compliance with health and safety codes regarding the smoke detectors and the water heater. And so the smoke detector and water heater have been added to the transfer disclosure statement instead. If you do the ESD, the exempt seller disclosure, and do not provide a transfer disclosure statement, then we have to do the water heater and smoke detector compliance statement, and it's a separate form. Okay, then we have this part that gets overlooked sometimes. Now up to here, we've gone through the whole thing, right? And the seller signs it. So the seller signs that all of these things up here are true to the best of their knowledge. And there hasn't been anything on here that the agent has talked about yet. Okay, so not every office, all of the big offices, all of the major offices and the heavy hitters in the industry, including us, all do an agent's visual inspection disclosure. And we're going to go over that in just a second. But if you are going to do that, and we are, you check this box, and then that moves everything that we had to disclose, we move it to the agent's visual inspection disclosure. If an agency or a small brokerage or something else decides that they don't want to require their agents to do the AVID, they can check this box here that says agents notes the following, or agent notes no items for disclosure. And they can write in here items that they saw, that looked at. The fence was falling down in the back, whatever, you know, the paint was peeling on the front of the house. There were some missing tiles on the roof that I could see from the street, things. And so there may be some things that they write in there. That is legal. It's not Century 21 legal, because Century 21 wants the AVID. But other offices you will see has that. I will tell you that I've seen people put in this before, and it is lost in court. Just so you know. But if you receive one of these that says, agent recommends that buyer obtain a professional home inspection, and that's their disclosure, that's been thrown out of court and said, no, that case is dismissed, you can't do that. And so just writing that in there does not do. We are required as an agent to do a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection of the property. And that leads us to what we write either on the AVID or what some offices write in this box, but it has to be things that can be noted.
So I've been doing this for many years and worked for several different brokerages, and I've always been told, never check that second box. Agent notes there's nothing to disclose.
Yeah,
Never check that box.
I know.
He said that's the fastest way to a lawsuit.
If you do it, it makes you look like you didn't do any of that reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection, because
Right.
almost every house has something.
Exactly.
Okay, and then the other agent involved needs to do the same thing. They either need to supply us with an AVID or at least have something filled out in here. Just a signature doesn't do any good. And then everybody signs off that they received it all. So and I'm not gonna go through the details of this because it's pretty similar. But if you do a manufactured home, if you do the residential listing addendum, which you do for a manufactured home, that's also a mobile home or something. The same form is used for the RLA, residential listing agreement. But there's a little checkbox up near the top that says manufactured home. And if you check that box, it's going to download this. It's going to download a manufactured home addendum that says it's a manufactured home. And that leads us to a different disclosure. Again, it's a manufactured home and mobile home transfer disclosure statement. And as you go through it, you won't find a lot of differences other than the fact that it will ask you to talk about the manufactured home. Here's 2004 Skyline. If I could have made up some serial numbers and things, but you're supposed to try to get the serial numbers off of the coach. And then it goes through and it talks about some of the same things. You can see it's not quite as extensive because it doesn't have quite as many items as a stick-built home, but it does identify things that are on the property. And then it goes through all these same things that we've talked about in the past. And when we did the other one. But just know that the manufactured home requires a different one. Okay, let's talk about this one. This one, I should have loaded in fact, when I was putting these together yesterday, I should have uploaded the red line version of this because the fire hardening and defensible space disclosure and addendum, almost the entire thing was in red because they send out for review to people that are on the Standard Forms Advisory Committee and other realtors that have been in the business and helping out for a while on things. They send them out ahead of time and they say, these are the things that we're considering changing. What do you think? And then you say, well, I don't think this is a good idea. Let's change this back. And then everybody talks about it. And then it goes to the attorneys and the attorneys review it. And then they finally come up to something that everybody votes on. And if you get the majority of ayes, then it moves forward as the new standard form. So anyway, a couple of things that I just wanted to point out, and they've been in there in some way or another on the other forms. But the notice and disclosure of vulnerabilities in paragraph 2, okay, down here is paragraph 2, are only required for sellers of residential properties if the property contains 1 to 4 units. Okay, so that's what we're doing here is residential. The seller is required to complete a transfer disclosure statement, the TDS or the MHTDS, which we just went through. The property is located in either a high or very high fire hazard severity zone. And the improvements on the property were constructed before January 1st, 2010. All right, so that's pretty self-explanatory. But then here's the key thing that people get kind of hung up on a little bit. If, and here it's in bold letters, if any of these 4 conditions is not met, seller does not have to answer the questions in paragraph 2B and 2C. So if any one of these things is not met, like maybe it is in a high fire severity zone, but they didn't have to complete a TDS because they were exempt, then it's not up to them to disclose these items down here because again, they don't live in the property. And so they are not required to know whether or not the roof is fire resistant and things like that. So if any one of these is not met, then you don't have to fill out this part down here.
So I'm confused. What is the purpose of this document?
The purpose of this document is just to let people know, especially in today's world, in California, that I don't even know what high fire and very high fire means anymore because I mean we have cities burned down for crying out loud. So it's like who would have thought? Now maybe a few years back when Paradise burnt down, because it was kind of in the middle of the forest,
right?
Then you might expect that and stuff, but who expects? Yeah, who expects the peninsula? Who expects that to burn down?
Yeah.
Because it's all houses and a few trees and things, and and have it go all the way down to Malibu and stuff, you know, so I don't know exactly what the high, but the basic purpose of the disclosure at this point in time is to let people know that there is, that one of these things, or that all of these things exist, or that I'm not required to tell you about all this because one of them doesn't exist. Does that make sense? It's kind of like a disclosure to disclose that you don't have to disclose anything almost. Or it's a disclosure to say that you do have some things to disclose. If all four of those are met, and notice I said all four of these are met, then you are required to do this part down here.
Okay.
So when was the property built, and is it, are roof coverings or eaves or combustible landscaping? Are there any of these things that exist? And it is up to the seller. Again, you see here it says, are you the seller aware? So it still refers back to the seller. Now, does the seller know some of these things? Maybe and maybe not. Do I know whether or not there's roof ventilation where vents have openings on my roof? Yeah, I can probably look at it and I can see that there's some vents over the attic and there's some vents over a couple of places where I suppose that a spark could get in. I don't know. Hopefully I'll never get tested. Are the roof coverings made of untreated wood shingles? And we don't sell those anymore, actually, other than for repair. But you can't get building permits to put wood shingles on houses anymore. But we have houses that were built years and years and years ago that had wood shingles and things. I had a house built with wood shingles on it probably 25 years ago or so. And when it came time to replace the roof, we replaced it with just regular composition tile. So, is there combustible landscaping within 5 feet of the house? Well, I ought to be able as a seller to know that, right? I had an insurance company tell me a few years ago that I had to cut down my hedge that went under my picture window in front of my house. I have a great big picture window that's probably, I don't know, 15 feet long or wide. And right below that, we had this big, beautiful hedge. And the insurance company came out for a little visit and sent us a note that said that we had 30 days to get rid of that hedge because it was pushed right against the house. Now, my house is stucco, so I'm not sure how that actually would have caught fire, but maybe if the bushes were on fire and some of the sparks would go up, they might hit eaves.
Yeah.
Who knows? I don't know how any of that stuff works. But bottom line is that if I can't see, if I can see it and I know it, do I know whether I put in, do I have single pane windows? Do I have any of these kind of things happening? Then obviously I check yes, yes, no, no, whatever it happens to be. But again, only if one of these or all four of these are in place, right? That's the thing that I keep referring back to. Nowadays, we also have to disclose, and this is brand new on the brand new revision of June 25. And that is that we have to fill out this section that says we may have completed some of these low-cost retrofits during the time we've owned the property. And it goes through and it lists those. And here again, have you, the seller, completed any of the following? You can check no if you haven't, or yes that you have. And it's just a check item that says that tells the buyer that yes, we replaced the roof with a fire rated roof, or yes, we did this, or no, we didn't do that, or no, we haven't done this. And each one of these things we can check. And some of these are low cost. Low cost, I don't consider roof replacement being low cost necessarily. But I guess in the eyes of the value of an entire house, if you've got a house that's worth $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 and you have to put $50,000 into a roof, I guess relatively that's okay. But anyway, most of these other things are easy things to take care of. And have any of them been done or not? If they have been, again, we just disclose it down here. Let me grab this real quick.
What do we do for sellers that say, I don't know? I'm not sure.
Then it's no. Cause that's why it starts out by saying, are you seller aware?
Okay.
So if they don't know, then they just check no, and that puts in a position of no.
So what if they say something like, well, possibly, but I don't know?
Yeah, then it's no,
So, okay.
cause they're not solid
aware.
with it and
Okay.
things, yeah. All right, and down here on this second part, we go through some defensible space things. Now, defensible space is different in different areas, so it talks about local compliance requirements. And this you might have to do some checking on occasionally, or make that call when you're trying to find out about properties and things. But the property is or is not subject to local vegetation management. Now, how do I know that? Well, I have to call, or the seller has to call, somebody has to make that call to the local fire marshal or the local fire in City Hall. There will be a department that there's a fire marshal and he has a team of people that work there and things. And we have to get on there. Somebody has to get on there and find out. Or we can just do this. Here's the default. Seller is unaware of whether property is in compliance with local or state defensible space laws and does not have a report that says otherwise. So that was put in there kind of as a default. And that's the one that you're probably going to use.
So then that puts the onus on the buyer and
Yeah.
buyer's agent.
Exactly. Then the responsibility shifts. Or if you do know, because maybe you've had a report done or something, maybe you've had requirements by your insurance company or something. If you do know, then property is in compliance. That's a nice one. And it meets the requirements, and I will have documentation. Excuse me, I've got the hiccups. It's a good time to get the hiccups. Seller shall deliver to buyer documentation of compliance. So if you have the report done by the California Fire or something, and we're going to talk about that in just a second. But anyway, that seller responsibility then is, if you've done the inspection, then your responsibility is to give a copy of that report. And you give a copy of the report even if it's not in compliance. So if you got a report done and they said, oh no, you got to do this and you got to do this, you got to cut back 50 feet from the house. You can't have those trees that are over 100 feet high, so they've got to be 100 feet back from the house. And anyway, there may be all kinds of stipulations in there. And you have to represent those one way or the other. So here's where we come to responsibility. And here it says that C says that a buyer and seller agreement regarding which party shall obtain compliance with applicable state or local defense requirements. So where does that come? Well, where that comes from is I did an NHD, and the NHD said that I was in a high fire or very high fire area. And so from a standpoint of a buyer, I'd like to know whether or not my specific property is in that high fire or very high fire area. It says that it is, but when they do those maps, it's a broad map. And they cover a lot of areas and they give themselves a buffer on each side and things. And so there may be some local lenience because of the fact that you got water all around you, or you're built in the middle of a concrete jungle or something like that. So there may be some things that preclude you from having to do that. But bottom line is that it's the buyer's responsibility at that point in time, in my opinion, to find out if there's local vegetation management. And you know what would lead them to do that? Well, on the NHD, it says it's in a high fire area. And I look around and it's kind of backs up against, I don't know, Bureau of Land Management land that's nothing but sage and stuff. And it's at the top of a hill or the base of a hill or whatever. And it looks like there's the potential for fire. And the NHD says that there's a potential for fire. So now I've got two things. I've got the eye test, which is the one where I look and see, and then I've also got the information from the NHD that says that. So I've got a couple of things going on there. Or is it the seller's responsibility? And we can check those off and figure out who's going to do what when it comes to that. But there is a, let's see, where is it? I must be back up here. Oh, I was looking to see where the website is that you can get. Oh, there it is. Okay, so there's https://www.fire.ca.gov/d/. And that is a website that you can get on, and you can order, either as a buyer or a seller, you can order those reports to be done. Right now, they're either free to not very expensive, depending on where your property is located, because they do charge you a little bit if they have to go into the boonies to find your house. But for the most part, they don't cost you money. They get to them right now. They're getting to them quite quickly. We had one done the other day, and I think we ordered it online on Tuesday, and I think Friday they went out, or they called us to say they were going out to do the inspection. So it was only 4 days for them to get out there and do the inspection. We had the report back within a couple of days. And then we had the report done, so we had done the seller's part and paid for it, although we didn't have to pay for it. So
Terry, do we, as the seller, keep going up a little bit? Is the seller required to mark one of those 3 boxes? Or
where am I
scroll
going?
I'm sorry, scroll down to the pink highlighted where the seller, right there. Is the seller required to mark 4, 5, or 6, or can we just leave it blank and under the number 1?
Yeah, you don't have to mark it unless you're going to do it or have done it.
Okay. So that
Otherwise,
makes it easy.
yeah, otherwise just go with the default.
Okay. Thank you.
So if the seller receives documentation referring to either of these?
Yeah.
Okay.
And sometimes, and hopefully you haven't ever had this happen, but I'm sure if you've been in business at all, you've had a deal fall out. And if you've had a deal fall out, sometimes you've had some of these things done already. And so those are reports that are available. And so if they're available, it kind of goes back on the TDS, it says, and any other reports. So yes, I have that fire report, so I can check here that it was the seller's responsibility, and here it is. And
So
so
Terry,
you
on
kind of have, yes,
paragraph 4 says the seller has a responsibility to obtain documentation of compliance. How would you obtain documentation of compliance?
well, that comes from the report that you get. The report that you get from that cal.gov.fire thing that I showed you the website on a minute ago. If you get documentation from there, it will document that you actually are in compliance or you are not in compliance. And if you're not in compliance, it will identify the things that you have to do to become compliant. Okay. Final inspection report disclosure. And this is something that when we deal with new homes, new properties constructed, the property was newly constructed or was rebuilt following damage to a fire. The construction required a permit. The seller has obtained the final inspection report addressing compliance with home fire hardening. Because anything that's built or rebuilt now has to be built with those things done. It has to have a screen on top of the chimney. It has to have enclosed eaves. It has to have dual pane windows. It has to have fire. I won't say fireproof, but it has to have fire resistant roofing and things. So they have to be built that way now. So this is kind of just letting people know that this property was recently constructed. All of the permits have been pulled. I have a copy of the reports, and or you may obtain a copy at, and then it's wherever we got, whatever county we got the when we had the house done.
If the property is older and does not meet those standards, then that is grandfathered in and they don't have to comply with those. Is that correct?
Right,
Okay. So like it was built in 1950.
in 1950s. I don't even know how many places had permits in 1950s. I mean, I wasn't around building houses then, so I don't really know.
Yeah.
All right, so this is the legal jargon to this. To this fire hardening thing, California Assembly Bill, so I just put this in here so you could read it if you wanted to.
Okay.
But California Assembly Bill AB 38, that's Assembly Bill, requires sellers of residential properties to or located in a high or very high fire hazard to provide documentation in compliance with wildfire defensible space requirements before the close of escrow. And now this is the little kicker on here, kind of has to do with all the things we've talked about above. If compliance documentation cannot be obtained before the close of escrow, the buyer and seller can agree in writing that the buyer will obtain it within 1 year. So California is looking to have any property sold be compliant somehow. They want to make sure that we're as compliant as we can be, trying to protect us from ourselves.
Now, is there a site where we can determine whether or not you're in a high fire severity zone?
Just the natural hazard, when you order the natural hazard
Okay.
disclosure,
So it comes
that's the best place
in
to
the
get it.
NHD, okay.
Yeah. And then it tells you just here what their aim is, they're just trying to reduce wildfire risk and those kind of things. So this is the law. The law is AB 38 and it is in effect. It was passed last year, so it is in effect. So that just identifies why we have to even do this in the first place. So are we kind of good with that?
Yes.
This also discusses a little bit what we were just discussing. And this is the defensible space. I don't know why they call it decision tree. That's interesting. But basically what it is it talks about those different things. Is property located in an area where local city vegetation management is? And it either is or it isn't. This isn't something we have to fill out. This is something that we just have to know and give our sellers. It actually downloads with the defensible space.
So we don't check boxes on this, we just give it to them.
No, we just give it to them so that they can look and see what it is that they might have to do.
Alright.
Okay, and it's 2 pages long. But you notice on here, there's not even places for signatures or anything, so it's not anything that's gonna hold you up. Okay. Solar. This is a solar advisory and questionnaire. Don't know why they didn't call it, I wonder why they called it an advisory and questionnaire instead of a questionnaire and disclosure. Because it actually is a disclosure in a way. We have a solar powered system on the house. This is the seller talking, okay, this isn't Terry. And it meets all of these different requirements. And now I'm gonna tell you about it. Well, the approximate age, are you aware of the approximate age? It's gonna ask you down here. But yes, I know about this. I know all of these different things. Do I know the kilowatt size? And notice it says here, are you the seller aware? And I will tell you, in all honesty, I will tell you that there's a whole lot of people over the past 10 years that have gotten solar powered systems put on their house that didn't know anything except for that the guy that came out and sold it to them told them that they would be paying less money to lease the equipment than they would be to buy electricity. And that's all they know. And so they don't really know all of these things, but they do have a contract that gives them that information. So they might have to dig and find out what that information is.
Where they bought from.
Was it purchased? Was it leased? What's the dollar amounts? Blah, blah, blah. It talks about all these different things. What's the approximate amount of your bill? Who's the power company? Hopefully people will know these things, or at least some of them. And if they do, they're just supposed to check these boxes. And again, if you check yes, you write down below what it was. So you write down, and what this does more than anything is it tells people, number one, tells them that you have solar on the house, not that they wouldn't have noticed that anyway when they pulled up. But number two, by getting a contract, by getting them looking for the contract, we can find out whether the contract is assumable, or whether it's gonna have to be, the lease is gonna have to be bought out at the end, or whether or not it's on a part of a lien, and it's a lien against the property, it's gonna have to be paid off in order to clear title. But we know those things early, we don't know them late. And so that's the key for us, is to get that information as soon as we can. All right, now this form is new. It's been revised a little, but it's newer. And we talked about this just a little before. So I did some work on my house since I did my original disclosure. Or since I did my original seller property questionnaire, whatever the case may be. Now I fixed this, I've replaced that, I've repaired that, and you want to make sure people know about it. And this is an addendum to a prior disclosure. And it says here, this is an addendum to the SPQ. This is an addendum to the TDS or one of the other disclosures. We have done whatever. We have replaced, on the previous disclosure, I had that the water heater was 20 years old and leaking at the top, and I replaced that. So now it's got a brand new water heater with a warranty. And so you can you can create this addendum for anything that you've done that's improved the property, or if you have something that blew up in the meantime. You know, you're out on a rural area or something, and all of a sudden your well went dry. Well, good thing to let people know, because you had a well report in there somewhere, and now we don't have water. Well, you need to let somebody know, so they want to know whether they have an opportunity at that point to decide whether or not to move forward with the transaction or what, because now you've told them additional things. Shouldn't be hidden. It should be told, good or bad. I always tell people this is a chance for them to brag, not a chance for them to hide things. And that's kind of the way I look at it. But it's an amendment to the prior disclosure, whichever that disclosure happens to be. And everybody reads it, signs off on it, and now we've disclosed what we're supposed to disclose. Hey, here's our avid. And I'm gonna kind of speed through this. We're supposed to be out of here in like 7 minutes. I'm sure that'll happen. It hasn't ever in the past, but there's first for everything. So here's our disclosure. I'm the one that did it. I like the idea of what it says here. Notice again, it's to try to help us as realtors. Agent inspection limitations. California law does not require me to inspect the following: areas that are not reasonably and normally accessible, areas off-site of the property, public records or permits, common areas with planned developments. Okay, those are items that, like public records and those kind of things, that should be the seller helping me get those together. Right. They're gonna have an easier time of it than I am anyway. If they call and say, I own the property at 1234 Disclosure Way, and I'm trying to find out about a permit here, was there one everyone pulled? It's gonna be an easier time for them than it is for us. But I will tell you that sometimes we deal with people that are incapable for one reason or another of doing those things. Maybe it's a physical thing, maybe it's an age thing, maybe they just can't get out and about, or whatever the case may be. So there may be some times, but California law does not require us to do those things. They don't. They don't make it illegal for us to do those things, but they don't require it either. Then here's some other agent limitations. I don't have to climb on the roof or get into the attic. I don't have to look under a furniture or pictures or wall hangings or anything else. We're not going to move all those things to see if you have faded paint or hole in the wall. I don't have to go beneath a house. I don't have to go into a crawl space. I don't have to go up a hillside. I don't have to turn on all the appliances to see if they work. I don't have to measure the property. I don't have to know about mold or any of those kind of things. Do I know about them sometimes? Sure, but I'm not required to, so I'm not gonna get myself into that situation. So. Here's the key. Buyers should review any disclosures obtained from the seller. That's some of the ones we just went over, and I think we have 2 more to go over. Or obtain advice about and inspections of the property from other appropriate professionals. And review any findings of those professionals with the person who prepared them. If the buyer fails to do so, buyer is acting against the advice of the broker. Now we go to my inspection. And here's my inspection right now. So I went through every room in the house, right? I looked in the living room and it says normal carpet with wear in heavy traffic areas. If you can't read my writing, it's because I was trying to be a doctor and fell short. Dining room, okay, no apparent issues. Kitchen, several loose cupboard doors. Bedroom, master bedroom, chipped paint around door jamb. But whatever it is, okay, these are visual. Right. You know, it's a reasonably competent and diligent visual inspection. So we have to just rely on our vision to see what's going on. Now, you know what? There's also a thing that's kind of, it's not really visual, but it's, if you go in and there's real heavy animal odors, you know, cat or dog urine or something like that, if there's real heavy odors and things like that, you have a place down here that says other observed known conditions not specified above.
What is the company's, I was always told when I complete this is to just keep it simple. Just write your observation and don't expound upon it. Don't explain what you think it is. Just write what you saw. Like the cabinet door is askew or the bedroom door is askew. That's all you gotta put. Don't have to put is askew. Might be a sign of foundation settling. Don't write any of that. Just write what you observe. Is that the company's policy?
That's company's policy.
Okay.
Just write what you observe. It's visual. Just remember it's visual inspection.
Okay.
And this is what I saw and this is what I wrote down. And
Don't expound
along
upon it.
those lines, I saw a stain in the ceiling.
Right,
Recommend a roof repair or something. No, I don't know.
right. Just a stainless steel.
It's a stain in the ceiling. It may have been there for 10 years. Who knows? Yeah. No, that's good plan. Keep it simple. Sign off on everything down here. Wood balconies. This is a new one. Just came out in December. And it was for a law that actually was supposed to take effect January of this year, but it was expanded to January of 2026 instead. That's what it says right here. But what it is basically if you have 3 or more units, so it's the townhome, condominium, whatever it is, 3 or more units that has decks or balconies or stairways or anything else leading up to the other floor or something. They are by the end of this year supposed to be inspected. And then every 6 years thereafter. And so it's an idea of trying to keep us all safe. I know you've all been on a rickety or crumbling stairway before in your life. And this was probably a result of that balcony that collapsed and 20 people were killed and things, you know, like somebody says, oh my gosh, we didn't even think about that. So anyway, the idea is that has to be done every once in a while. So here we are. We've got something, since it's January of 2026, we use this now. We don't wait until January because the buyer needs to know that this is something that has to take place by 2026. So if they're buying a condo in a condo development and the condo development has an HOA, the HOA is probably responsible. They're definitely responsible for getting inspections done. But it would be a good idea for the buyer to continually ask them if they have to, if there are a report available. Or have you done the inspection? Do we at least know that it has to be changed or whatever? Because it's up to the homeowners association to take care of that. in most cases. Now, really, the buyer takes care of it, or the seller takes care of it one way or the other, because they would probably see an assessment in their monthly HOA dues or something. I'm not sure how different people are going to handle it one way or the other. I know that one of the ladies that works in our Hemet office, who handles a lot of paperwork for us and keeps track of all the employees in our company and all of the agents in our company and all of the everything else, and tries to keep everything lined up. And I know that she lives in a condominium where that report was done, and they've already established with all of the homeowners and things that it was going to be an assessment on their homeowners association and things, and so they're already paying to have the work done. All right. Just I did this in pink here just to identify it as separate, but this is not a home inspector thing. The home inspector can't go out. He's not the licensed inspector. He's not the guy that can say, yes, it has it. I can say that. I mean, I can look at it, see if there's rickety stairs or if there's concrete crumbling or something. I could see that. But what the requirement is license classification issued by a contractor's state license board with a minimum of 5 years experience as a holder of the aforementioned classifications or license. And they need to be, and everything needs to be certified through California as an inspector to officially do this. And if it's not, then it's not any good. If the home inspector just calls it out, doesn't mean anything. It has to be done with an engineer, civil or structural engineer, or a building contractor that holds any of these licensing requirements and things. So it has to be somebody who knows what's going on. It can't just be Joe the inspector. Okay, lead paint. Oh, we'll hurry, we're over. Sorry. Anyway, lead paint, pre-1978. That's the only time you have to use this disclosure. Anything that's built after 1978, you don't have to, but if it's pre-1978, then you need this disclosure. This doesn't say anywhere on here that it has lead paint. It only says that I have knowledge of it or I have no knowledge of it. And in most cases, unless somebody has had construction done on their home, they don't know whether or not there's lead paint. Prior to 1978, lead paint was used a lot of times. It's stronger. It bonds better. But it also gets eaten by kids and dogs and things like that when it peels and stuff. And it also can, if it powders up and things because of construction that's being done, it can affect respiratory and things. So it can affect things. This isn't claiming that it has any of those. It's nobody sticking their neck out saying it. It is simply letting the buyer know that the house was constructed prior to 1978 and the possibility of lead paint exists. So if that's an issue to you, then you might want to have somebody come out and do a full inspection. Market conditions advisory. This one, some people do this, some people don't. I will tell you that right off the bat. I think it's kind of redundant a little bit in the fact that I think we all know these things. As a buyer, you are responsible for determining the price you want to offer. You know, I don't get to choose what price you offer on a property. I tell you what the property is worth. I do a CMA for you to show you what the property is worth. And we look at the list price and see what they're trying to get out of it. And we look at the lender's information and find out whether we need any cost paid. And from there, a price is determined. So it seems to me like we already do these things. You have your investigation contingencies, you have your appraisal contingency, you have your loan contingency. Those are all on the contract itself. Even the insurance contingency has been added now, so it's on there. So if you feel like I don't think this is required from our compliance right now. It doesn't hurt anything to let somebody know how the system works. However, it's not an absolute requirement all the time. Probate listing addendum and advisory. Okay, if this is a probate property, then I have to disclose to people that it is a probate listing advisory. And that little box gets checked on the RPA itself. And when it gets checked on the RPA, then this advisory gets downloaded. And it's easy to fill out. It just says that the listing period shall be shorter than 90 days of length. It tells you whether it's okay. So this is part of a probate. It's a conservatorship, it's a guardianship, it's a receivership, or other. We don't know what it is, except for what the attorney tells us or what the seller gives us that the attorney has turned into him or her. The list, court confirmation is required or may be required, or does somebody have full authority to move forward with it? That'll all be stated in the probate information itself. Information in the listing will not be provided to the MLS specified in the listing. Information about this listing. I have to read that more than once. Okay. Let me skip that for now. We're out of time. But anyway, compensation specified to broker. I haven't seen any MLS regulation that says that we can't put that it's a probate, but I don't know what information about this listing. The only thing I can think of is perhaps it's referring to information about the people involved or the
It's probably because like the probates are so delayed, it takes so
Yeah.
long, and just making you aware that
just making aware that it's happened. Compensation, and it's subject to any restrictions imposed by California probate code and determination of the court. Dispute resolution is deleted. There's no dispute in the court. Once you make an offer and the court decides to do it, that's the deal. And I have attached CAR probate advisory to this agreement. And here's the probate advisory, and this talks about the same thing. What are the exemptions? And it talks about what those are. And that's just letting everybody know what I have to tell you and what I don't have to tell you, or what I can't tell you. All right. I think we got through everything except for how come the I don't know why the seller property questionnaire didn't get downloaded on this.
So Terry, are disclosures allowed to be complete, I mean, required to be completed electronically? Is that a company policy, or can they be done?
They can be
Wet signatures?
They can be wet, so they can be either one.
Okay.
All right, for some reason the SPQ or sellers, for some reason it didn't get downloaded, and I'm not sure why. But let me just click on it, or let me just tell you about it for a second. All right, the SPQ is the seller property questionnaire. And it goes through and it describes, and this is the seller property questionnaire. So remember that it's the seller disclosure, but it's the seller who is describing what they've done to the property recently. It was painted within the last 6 months. I just replaced the water heater. The roof is only a year or two old. It's got a warranty on it, whatever. And it talks about things that are going on with the property in a little bit more detail than what the TDS does. And so when you get to the SPQ, seller property questionnaire, and I can't believe that I was dumb enough to not load that up here. I know. It's gonna make everybody hesitant to call me about anything in the future because of my oversight here. All right, anyway, I don't know why it didn't get downloaded. I apologize for that. But the bottom line is that the seller's property questionnaire is kind of an extension of the TDS. However, the TDS is the one that's required by California law. And the SPQ is one that goes along kind of as a sidekick. And that is that if you have some items on here that you did or didn't do or whatever, it helps you to explain things that you have done. I tell people it's kind of like a brag sheet in a way. You can tell us what you've done to continually maintain the house and things. You can tell us what you've done recently that makes it better than it would have been otherwise and things. So it's one of those forms that kind of goes hand in hand with this. However, it is it's a little more in depth than what the TDS is. And it's such a bummer that I didn't do this. You know, tomorrow's class is on handling objections when we're dealing with contracts. But you know what I'm going to do is tomorrow I'm going to squeeze 10 minutes of seller property questionnaire on the front of tomorrow's class, because I think it's important enough that we cover it. Yeah, that's what I'll do. I do not know why it didn't get downloaded.
It's 4 pages.
Yeah. So anyway, I apologize for missing that one. But I guess we're 12 minutes overdue anyway. Are there any questions on the things that we've covered that we haven't covered it, or that might lend itself to some additional discovery or disclosure or something else? Okay, I don't see any hands jumping up and down. So I'm going to go over here and I'm going to stop the recording.
Thank you, Terry.
You're welcome, Shakira. Talk to you soon.
So Terry, I know there's a disclosure requirement for deaths on the property, but is there a requirement for haunting?
Haunting?
Haunting, yeah, because something happened to me that I've never experienced before, and I cannot explain what happened, but